61 years ago, a 17-year-old girl named Darlene Cook walked out of the Draper's Mill textile factory in Kellerton, Virginia, at the end of her Friday shift, waved goodbye to the woman at the next station, and was never seen alive again. The case went cold before most of the people watching this were born. Authorities at the time concluded there was insufficient evidence of foul play. Darlene, they decided, had likely left on her own. A young girl, a small town, reasons unknown. The file was closed within 6 months. Her mother, Loretta Cook, spent the next 4 decades writing letters to the Kellerton Sheriff's Office, asking them to reopen it. She never stopped. Not once. Then, in the spring of 2024, a telephone rang in the cold case unit of the Virginia State Police. On the other end of the line was an 83-year-old man in a nursing facility in Roanoke, Virginia. He said he had been carrying something for 61 years. He said he needed to put it down. What he told the detective who answered that call would close a case that had outlasted careers, administrations, and generations of investigators, and would finally give a name to the person who took Darlene Cook's life on a warm Friday evening in May of 1963. But to understand what was at stake in that phone call, you have to understand who Darlene was, and why the people who loved her never let her go. Kellerton was a mill town in the foothills of southwestern Virginia, population 2,200, built around 2 things: the textile factory that ran 3 shifts a day along the river, and the Baptist church that anchored the town's sense of itself on Sunday mornings. In 1963, the world was in motion in ways that Kellerton felt only at the edges. The March on Washington was still 3 months away. Kennedy was still in the White House, and the evening news arrived in living rooms on sets with rabbit ears that had to be adjusted by hand. Life in Kellerton ran on shift schedules and potluck suppers, and the sound of the mill whistle carrying across the valley at 6 in the morning. Darlene Cook had lived here all her 17 years. She was the youngest of 3 children born to Loretta and Earl Cook, who ran a small appliance repair shop off Main Street, and were known, as Earl would say himself, for being the kind of people who minded their business and meant what they said. Darlene had graduated from Kellerton High that spring, the first in her family to finish high school, and had taken the factory job to save money for secretarial school in Roanoke. She had a plan and a savings ledger to go with it, the kind of paper ledger with a red cover where she tracked every dollar coming in and every dollar going out. She sang in the church choir on Sunday mornings. She had a best friend named Ruth Ann Delaney, who lived 2 streets over and with whom she shared everything: shoes, secrets, and a running commentary on the boys in their grade that Loretta pretended not to hear when they talked on the phone. She had a habit of humming while she worked, a low tuneless sound that her co-workers at the mill had come to find comforting. You always knew where Darlene was, her co-worker Helen Bassett told a reporter years later. You could hear her before you saw her. She was going somewhere. Everyone who knew her could see it. She had the kind of energy that small towns simultaneously produce and cannot quite contain. A restlessness that was not discontent, just ambition looking for more room. On the afternoon of Friday, May 10th, 1963, Darlene worked her full shift at Draper's Mill. She changed out of her work smock in the locker room, pinned her hair back the way she always did on Fridays, and picked up her purse and her paper bag lunch. She never ate lunch until the afternoon break, a habit her mother had never been able to break her of. She waved to Helen Bassett at the door. "See you Monday," Helen said. "See you Monday," Darlene said. It was the last conversation anyone who loved her would ever have with her. The mill let out at 5:00 p.m. on Fridays. At 5:03 p.m., Darlene signed out at the timekeeper's window. 12 co-workers left the building at the same time. Darlene walked with Helen Bassett as far as the corner of Mill Road and Calder Street, where Helen turned north toward her house and Darlene turned south toward home. Helen watched her for a moment. She would say this later, many times, to many investigators, and then turned away. That turn took 4 seconds. When Helen glanced back, Darlene was already gone from view. The road bent around a stand of red cedars at the south end of Mill Road, and there was nothing unusual in someone disappearing around that curve. It was May. It was a Friday. The evening was warm and golden. By 6:30 p.m., Loretta Cook was at the front door. By 7 p.m., she was on the telephone to the Bassetts. By 8:15 p.m., she had called the Kellerton Sheriff's Office, and the deputy who answered told her that 17-year-old girls sometimes made their own decisions about where they went on Friday evenings, and that if Darlene hadn't come home by morning, she should call back. She called back at 5:45 a.m. The search began on Saturday, May 11th. 40 volunteers walked the fields and creek beds south of Mill Road. Cedar Run tributary was searched by boat. Darlene's body was found late that afternoon, in a shallow depression in a thicket of cedar and honeysuckle, less than a quarter mile from where Helen Bassett had last seen her alive. She had not made it home. She had barely made it around the curve. The Kellerton Sheriff's Office called the Virginia State Police. Investigators arrived Sunday morning. The scene had already been compromised by the search activity, a reality of 1963 that would later haunt the case. What physical evidence remained was limited. One clear boot print in the soft earth near the cedar thicket, a torn piece of dark wool fabric caught on a branch, most likely from a jacket or heavy shirt. And something else, something that would not become significant for more than 6 decades, a partial handprint pressed into the clay of the creek bank, just at the tree line. It was photographed. It was noted in the case file. In 1963, a partial handprint was a description. It was not evidence. It was enough to know that someone had been there. It was not enough to know who. The cause of death was determined. The investigation began. The clock started. The case was assigned to State Police investigator Wallace Pruitt, no relation to the Kellerton Cook family. A 28-year veteran who had worked homicide across southwestern Virginia and who drove to Kellerton on the Monday after Darlene's body was found and did not hurry through a single interview. He was methodical to the point of stubbornness. His supervisor once wrote in an evaluation, and Pruitt had taken that as a compliment. He worked from the center outward. People who had seen Darlene in the final hours. People she had known. The geography of the road between the mill and the cedar thicket. 3 men emerged early as persons of interest. The first was a seasonal worker at the mill named Clovis Harden, who had made comments to female employees that had been reported to management and ignored. He was interviewed at length. His whereabouts on Friday evening were partially corroborated by a fellow worker who had driven him to a bar in the next town. The alibi was thin. Pruitt kept him on a list. The second was a man named Boyd Ferris, a 26-year-old from a farm outside Kellerton, who had asked Darlene to a church social that spring and been politely declined. Ferris was interviewed twice. He was nervous. He accounted for his evening in detail, working late in his father's barn, his father present, and the father confirmed it. Ferris was shaken enough by the interviews that he moved away from Kellerton before summer was over. He would be looked at again, twice across the following decade, and was never charged. The third name on Pruitt's list was a man he could not place at the scene, could not eliminate from the scene, and could not stop thinking about. His name was Gerald Sount. Sount was 34 years old in 1963. a delivery driver for a hardware wholesaler based in Roanoke, whose route included Kellerton every other Friday. Pruitt confirmed that Sount's truck had been in Kellerton on May 10th. A filling station attendant on Calder Street recalled seeing it parked near the road in the early evening, on or near the route Darlene would have walked. Sount was interviewed and denied seeing Darlene. He was cooperative. He had no prior record. He was a church-going man, married, with 2 young children. Pruitt was not satisfied. He wrote in his case notes that Sount's denial had a quality he could not name and could not prove. He requested a follow-up interview. His supervisor declined to authorize it, citing limited resources and insufficient cause. The wool fabric from the branch was never matched to any garment. The boot print was consistent with a size 10 work boot, the most common size in the county. The partial handprint remained an unidentified description in a file. By 1965, the case was cold. Loretta Cook wrote her first letter to the sheriff's office in January of that year. She kept a carbon copy. She would keep a carbon copy of every letter she wrote for the next 40 years. Meanwhile, Gerald Sount drove his route every other Friday through Kellerton. By 1970, 7 years had passed, and Kellerton had changed in the ways small American towns changed in those years. The mill had automated 2 of its 3 shifts. A third of the families on Darlene's old street had moved on, and a new subdivision had gone up on the south side of town where there had been farmland. The cedar thicket where Darlene was found had been cleared by 1971 to make way for a drainage culvert. There was no marker. There was nothing left to see. Earl Cook died in 1974, 11 years after his daughter, without ever knowing what had happened to her. Loretta kept the appliance repair shop open 3 more years and then sold it and moved into the smaller house on Maple Street, where she still lived when the call came in 2024. She still had every carbon copy. By 1983, 20 years had passed. Darlene's brother Thomas had children of his own by then, a son and a daughter, and every May 10th he drove to Kellerton from Charlottesville and took Loretta to the cemetery and stood there with her for a while. They did not always talk. Sometimes they just stood. Wallace Pruitt retired from the Virginia State Police in 1989. Before he left, he wrote a letter to the Cold Case Unit in Richmond, asking that the Cook file be formally reviewed. The letter was acknowledged. The file was not re-examined for another 9 years. Gerald Sount had been living, all that time, in the same house in Roanoke where he had lived since 1960. He retired from the hardware company in 1992. His wife died in 2001. His children grew and scattered. By 2024, he was 84 years old and living in a care facility on the northwest side of Roanoke. And something had been sitting on him for 61 years, growing heavier with each one. The reward posting for information in Darlene Cook's case, which Loretta paid to run in the Kellerton Courier every year on Darlene's birthday, had been appearing for 59 consecutive years. The tip line had received, across all those decades, 42 calls. None had produced actionable evidence. The 43rd call came on a Tuesday morning in March 2024. Every case on this channel represents weeks of research, verifying facts, and piecing together real lives that deserved far better. If you want us to keep uncovering the truth behind stories like this one, take a second to like and subscribe. And drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now, let's get back to Darlene. Detective Sergeant Patricia Okoye had been assigned to the Virginia State Police Cold Case Unit for 6 years. She worked one active file at a time and gave it her full attention. The Cook file had been on her desk for 4 months. She had read Pruitt's original case notes twice. His handwriting was meticulous, the observations precise, and she had underlined Gerald Sount's name the first time she reached it, for reasons she could not fully articulate except that the entry felt unfinished, like a sentence someone had stopped in the middle of writing. On the morning of March 12, 2024, the tip line forwarded a call to her desk. The man on the other end identified himself. He said he was 83 years old. He said he was not well. He said he had been thinking about a girl named Darlene Cook since 1963, and that he needed to tell someone what he had seen. His name was Raymond Feltz. He had worked alongside Gerald Sount at the hardware wholesaler in Roanoke for 11 years, from 1959 to 1970. On the evening of May 10, 1963, the evening Darlene Cook died, Feltz had been servicing his own truck in the company yard when Sount returned from his Kellerton route 2 hours late. There was mud on his boots. He was not wearing the jacket he had left in that morning. Feltz asked about the jacket. Sount said he had lost it somewhere on the road. He was not himself. He changed the subject. He told Feltz not to mention it. Feltz hadn't. Not for 61 years. I didn't know, he told Okoye, his voice slow and careful the way voices get when they are carrying something heavy. Not right then. When I found out what happened to that girl, I told myself it was nothing. I told myself that for a long time. He stopped. I'm 83 years old, he said. I need to put it down. Okoye kept her voice level. She asked him to stay on the line. She opened the Cook case file to the evidence log and found the entry she was looking for. One piece of dark wool fabric, recovered from a cedar branch, May 11, 1963. Catalogued, stored, still there. Wool fibers preserved for 61 years in a climate-controlled evidence bag do not yield DINA, but they yield something else. Fibre composition. Dye lot, manufacturing pattern. A microscopic signature that can be compared against a known garment if a known garment can be found. Okoye contacted Gerald Sount's surviving son in Roanoke that afternoon. She explained she was investigating a historical case and asked whether his father had retained any clothing from the early 1960s. There was a long pause on the line. Dad kept everything, the son said. There are boxes in the storage unit. He never let us throw anything out. Gerald Sount had been, to everyone who knew him, an unremarkable man in the quietest possible sense. He had volunteered at his church food pantry for 30 years. He had coached his son's Little League team in the 1970s. His neighbors in Roanoke remembered him as a man who shoveled the walk for the elderly woman next door and returned borrowed tools promptly and kept his yard in good order. He was, in the way of certain men in certain communities, simply present, a background figure no one studied closely, because there was nothing, on the surface, to study. Court documents would later confirm that Sount had known who Darlene Cook was before May 10, 1963. His delivery route had brought him past Draper's Mill every other Friday for 3 years. Her name had appeared on the mill's supply account records. She had processed a small order through the supply office that spring. Investigators believe he had observed her on more than one occasion. They believe the evening of May 10th was not impulsive. It was deliberate. The storage unit belonging to Sount's son contained 43 boxes of personal effects. A lifetime's worth of objects from a man who, as his son had said, never threw anything away. Forensic analysts from the Virginia Department of Forensic Science spent 3 days working through them. In Box 31, wrapped in a dry cleaner's bag gone yellow with age, was a dark wool jacket, heavy twill, missing one button from the lower left panel. The button recovered from the cedar thicket in 1963 had been stored in the same evidence archive as the fabric fragment, in an envelope that had sat undisturbed for 61 years. The button matched. The fiber from the cedar branch matched the jacket's sleeve lining. Gerald Sount was arrested on April 4, 2024, at the care facility on the northwest side of Roanoke. He was brought from the common room in a wheelchair. He did not speak when Detective Okoye identified herself and read him his rights. He looked at the floor in front of him, very still, in the way of a man who has been expecting something for a very long time and finds, now that it has come, that he has nothing left to say. His son, reached by phone that afternoon, told reporters he was devastated and cooperating fully with investigators, and that he did not know how to reconcile what he was hearing with the father who had raised him. Kellerton no longer had its own sheriff's office. The county had consolidated years before. But the Kellerton Courier, which had run Loretta's birthday notice every year for nearly 6 decades, ran the news of the arrest on its front page. People who had grown up in Kellerton, scattered now across Virginia and beyond, shared it with each other. Some remembered Darlene. Some knew only her name. All of them felt something shift. Gerald Sount was charged with first-degree murder. Due to his age and physical condition, the case moved carefully through the courts. He died in custody in November 2024. Before a trial could be held, he was never convicted in a court of law. But the evidence was entered into the public record. The case was officially closed as solved. Darlene Cook's file was marked with a status it had waited 61 years to receive. Loretta Cook is 91 years old. She still lives on Maple Street in Kellerton, in the same house she moved into after she sold the shop. She has a photograph of Darlene on the mantelpiece that Thomas framed for her years ago. Darlene at her high school graduation, in a white dress with a collar, holding a small bouquet of daisies, squinting a little into the sun and smiling the particular smile of someone who knows exactly where they are going next. When Detective Okoye drove to Kellerton in April 2024 to deliver the news in person, Loretta was sitting at the kitchen table. Thomas was there. Okoye had called ahead and asked him to be there. Loretta listened without interrupting. She did not cry while Okoye was speaking. Afterward, she was quiet for a moment. Then she asked if she could keep the business card. She would add it, she said, to her file. She meant the carbon copies. 59 birthday notices. More than 40 letters to the sheriff's office across 4 decades. A life organized, in part, around the refusal to let the world decide that her daughter's life did not deserve an answer. Thomas told a reporter afterward that he had always believed someone would eventually call. "My mother knew things would come right," he said. "She kept believing it until it came true." The Draper's Mill building in Kellerton burned down in 1981 and was never rebuilt. The corner of Mill Road and Calder Street is a parking lot now. There is nothing there to tell you that a girl once turned south toward home and didn't make it. But Loretta Cook is still here. And now, for the first time in 61 years, she knows. Some cases close because of science. Some close because of persistence. This one closed because an 83-year-old man in a care facility decided that guilt, after 61 years, had grown heavier than silence. Raymond Feltz made a phone call. That call reached a detective who had been reading a dead man's underlined notes and felt something she couldn't name. That detective found a jacket in a box, and a button that had been sitting in an evidence room since 1963 matched. Justice does not always arrive in time to be witnessed by everyone who deserved to see it. Loretta Cook witnessed it. At 91 years old, sitting at her kitchen table in Kellerton, Virginia, she received the answer her daughter was owed. That is not nothing. That is everything. Before we leave Darlene's story, what do you think kept Raymond Feltz silent for 61 years? And at what point does a witness's silence become something more than silence? We'd love to hear your thoughts below. How do you feel about cases that are officially solved but never reach a verdict? Is that justice, or something short of it? Justice found Darlene Cook after 61 years. Stories like hers are why this channel exists. If you believe truth is worth pursuing no matter how long it takes, subscribe, and the next case is waiting in the description below. Thank you for being here.